90 miles. That is the only distance that matters here. 90 miles of warm Caribbean water between the southernmost point of Florida and the western tip of Cuba. A gap narrow enough that on a clear night, you can see the lights of one world from the edge of the other. It is 2025. The Cuban peso has collapsed. The power grid in Havana runs for maybe 4 hours a day. Food lines stretch around corners in a city full of buildings that have not been painted since the 1980s. The government in Havana is still standing, but standing the way something stands just before it doesn't. And the USS Gerald R. carrier strike group is already in the Florida Straits. The Marines are already aboard their ships. The signal goes out. So what actually happens when the United States decides that this is the moment? Can it take the island? And if it can, then what? Does this end in days, or does it never end at all? Here is the honest version of what this scenario looks like. Not the cable news version, not the press briefing version. There are gaps in any simulation like this, and this one is no exception. But this is the version worth thinking through carefully, because every element in it is drawn from real doctrine, real hardware, and real decisions that are closer to being made than most people realize. Cuba is not a mystery to American military planners. It is the most studied 90-mile problem in the history of United States strategic thinking. Every beach, every road, every radar installation. The island runs about 780 miles from its western tip to its eastern end, roughly the size of the state of Pennsylvania if you stretched Pennsylvania into a long, narrow arc and dropped it into the Caribbean. The western third is where most of the population lives, anchored by Havana at the northwestern corner, with its 2 million residents and its crumbling colonial grid. The eastern end is the Sierra Maestra, mountains dense with jungle and mist, the same terrain where a young revolutionary launched a guerrilla war in the 1950s and eventually won. That detail matters. It will matter again. Cuba's Revolutionary Armed Forces, the FAR, have approximately 50,000 active personnel, though years of economic collapse have hollowed out their readiness in ways that are hard to measure from the outside. What they lack in hardware, they have compensated for in doctrine. Since the early 1960s, Cuban military planning has been built around a single assumption: the Americans will come. The response to that assumption is called the War of All the People, Guerra de todo el pueblo, a doctrine of total societal resistance, where the formal military, the territorial militias, the civilian population, and the terrain itself all become part of the defense. The territorial militias alone have been cited at figures approaching 1 million people in their Cold War peak, though that number has almost certainly declined sharply. Even a fraction of it is not a small number. Cuba has roughly 3,000 miles of coastline and a mountain range that has swallowed occupation attempts before. The FAR knows it cannot win a conventional exchange with the United States military. It has never planned to. The smell of Havana on a normal day is diesel exhaust and salt air, and something faintly sweet from the bakeries that still run when the power is on. On the day the signal goes out, the power is already off. The backup generators in the military district command posts are running. Officers are at their stations. They have been watching the carrier group in the Straits for weeks. What the United States brings to this scenario is not a warship. It is a decision. And a decision, when it is backed by the most capable force projection machine in human history, looks like this. The Ford-class carrier brings roughly 90 aircraft to within 90 miles of Havana, which at combat speed for an FA-18 Super Hornet is a 6-minute flight. 6 minutes. Less time than it takes to read a situation report. Each Marine Expeditionary Unit in the amphibious force is a self-contained organism of approximately 2,200 personnel with its own air wing and armor, capable of going from ship to beach without outside support. The United States Cyber Command does not need to be seen to act. Cuba's power grid, already fragile, is a network built on Soviet-era architecture patched with Chinese equipment, centralized in ways that make it readable and targetable before a single aircraft leaves a flight deck. The B-2 stealth bomber, flying from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, can reach Cuba in roughly 3 hours. Cuba's air defense radar systems, mostly aging Soviet-supplied Pechora units with reported gaps in low-altitude coverage, cannot detect it. That asymmetry is not a tactical advantage. It is the elimination of an entire category of Cuban response before the scenario even begins. Our zero is not a beach landing. Our zero is silence. The power in Havana goes out. Not the rolling blackout kind. The all of it kind. The kind where the backup generators in the military command posts try to connect with the wider communications grid and get nothing back. Radar screens at the 3 main air defense sites go dark. Officers are issuing orders into phones that are no longer connecting to anything. The command and control network that the FAR has spent decades building is not designed to survive what United States Cyber Command can do to a centralized grid in the first 2 hours of an authorized operation. Then the sound arrives. Not from the sea, from directly above. A sound with no name in any language that existed before the 20th century. And then it is already gone, banking north before the mind can finish processing what the ears just reported. 2 B-2s, invisible to everything Cuba can put in the sky, release precision munitions over the 3 primary air bases. San Antonio de los Baños, the military apron at Jose Marti International, the airbase outside Santiago de Cuba. The MiG-29s, the handful still airworthy, burn on the runway. Not damaged. Gone before they taxi. On the ground in Havana, in a command post running on generator power, an officer who has trained for this moment his entire career is doing exactly what the doctrine says. Not trying to match the Americans in the air. Not standing at the bases to defend hardware that is already lost. He is dispersing. Units moving away from installations, toward the cities, toward the hills. He is calm in the specific way that people are calm when they accepted a thing long before it arrived. The amphibious landings begin within 48 hours. After air defenses are suppressed, Marines come ashore on beaches west of Havana against light and sporadic resistance. Small arms, RPGs from militia units. Not nothing, not enough. The beaches are secured in hours. The capital's military perimeter begins to contract. In Havana neighborhoods, residents are on rooftops and at windows. Some are quietly cheering. Not loudly, not publicly, not yet. Some are genuinely afraid. Not of the Americans arriving, but of the gap between the old thing falling and the new thing not yet having a shape. Some are neither. They are just watching. Revolutionary slogans cover every wall in sight. Nobody is painting over them. Not today. Havana is entered, not fallen. Entered. Falling suggests a moment, a single event with a before and after. This is a process, and the process is not clean. Each block is its own problem. A building that was a school yesterday has a sniper in it today. A road the Marines cleared this morning has something buried in it by afternoon. The FAR's conventional resistance collapses in days, exactly as every realistic assessment said it would. But the territorial militias, the neighborhood networks, the committees that have been the connective tissue of Cuban civil control for 60 years, those do not collapse. They change shape. In the Sierra Maestra, units that dispersed from Havana on day 1 are dug into terrain that has no runways to bomb, no radar to suppress, no command center to decapitate. Just men in mountains with weapons and standing orders written before the first aircraft ever appeared. The mist comes in every morning the same way it always has. But here's where it gets complicated, and it is worth being direct about this. The United States has won the war it knows how to fight. It has not yet started the war it does not. Taking Cuba takes days. Holding Cuba is a different question, and it is the only question that matters now. Spain held this island for 400 years and left with nothing but the memory of having been there. The United States occupied Cuba twice in the early 20th century, from 1898 to 1902, and again from 1906 to 1909. And each time it left behind agreements that Cubans spent the following decades trying to dissolve. The entire political identity of the Cuban government, the story it tells about itself and about the world, is built on foreign occupation as the original wound. An American military presence on the island does not dissolve that story. It confirms it, chapter and verse, in real time, on every wall that still has a slogan on it. The international picture hardens fast. Every Latin American government, regardless of its private feelings about Havana, condemns the invasion publicly. The United Nations Security Council vote is not a surprise. Russia and China veto. Cuba has roughly 11 million people. If 1% of that population is willing to support active armed resistance, that is 110,000 people who know every tunnel, every road, every neighborhood in ways that no satellite image can fully capture. Iraq had a population 4 times that size and a fraction of Cuba's ideological preparation, and it consumed nearly 2 decades of American military presence. Numbers do not lie about what insurgencies cost. What the United States cannot bomb is ideology. It cannot bomb jungle. It cannot bomb the passage of time. Years later, in the Sierra Maestra, the fighters who are still there, fewer now and older, call it by a phrase that does not translate cleanly into English. Not the invasion. Something closer to the second time, as in, they came the second time. The first time was the Bay of Pigs. The second time, they came themselves. Both times, the mountains did not move. In Miami's exile communities, the emotion is not simple. The thing they waited for across decades has happened. The island is open. And now arrives the part that no amount of waiting had fully prepared anyone for. The question of what a free Cuba actually looks like after 60 years of being told exactly what it would look like. In textbooks across Latin America, the invasion earns a chapter. Not about who won the military exchange, about what the military exchange meant. The chapter is not written kindly toward Washington. It never has been, not since 1898, and it is not now. The last image is the water itself. 90 miles of the Florida Straits, warm and blue, and completely indifferent to the decisions made on either side of it. It was never really about the distance. It was about what the distance meant, and that no carrier strike group in the world has ever known how to close.